In the quiet suburban town of Oak Ridge, North Carolina, life seemed to follow a predictable rhythm. The schools were renowned for their academic achievements, and the community prided itself on strong family values. The local high school was a place of camaraderie, rivalry, and youthful ambition. But beneath the surface, a dark and tragic story was unfolding, one that would forever change the lives of those involved and cast a shadow over the community. At the heart of this tragedy was Heather Malone, an 18-year-old cheerleader with a bright smile and an infectious energy. She was the kind of girl everyone noticed, a natural leader, popular among her peers, and with a sense of confidence that made her the center of attention at school events. But behind the facade of the girl who seemed to have it all, Heather struggled with deep-seated insecurities. Raised in a broken home with a mother who was emotionally distant and a father who was largely absent, Heather had never known the stability and love that many of her peers took for granted. Her need for validation and affection ran deep, and it was this vulnerability that would ultimately become her undoing. Nathan Ellis, the high school basketball coach, had come to Oak Ridge several years earlier. Charismatic and dedicated, he was well-liked by his students and respected by his colleagues. Married to Hannah, a kindergarten teacher who was described as kind and nurturing, Nathan's life appeared to be the embodiment of success. The couple had built a comfortable life together, and while their marriage wasn't perfect, there were no outward signs of trouble. Nathan was seen as the quintessential family man, hardworking, loyal, and driven by a desire to help his students succeed. However, the dynamic between Nathan and Heather began to shift during the winter of 2013. Initially, their connection had been professional. Nathan had always made it a point to mentor his students, especially those involved in extracurricular activities like cheerleading, but their relationship soon grew closer. Heather had begun to struggle with the pressures of high school life, balancing academics, cheerleading, and the growing expectations from her peers. She confided in Nathan, and he, seeing her as a vulnerable student in need of guidance, offered her a listening ear and words of encouragement. It was a relationship that started innocently enough, an older coach looking out for a younger student, offering advice and support when necessary. But as time passed, their conversations began to take a more personal tone. Heather started to lean more heavily on Nathan, seeking not just advice, but emotional support. She admired his strength and confidence, qualities she felt she lacked in her own life. Nathan, in turn, felt a sense of responsibility toward her. It was a familiar pattern for him, helping those in need, offering advice, and being a mentor. Yet, there was something more in his growing affection for Heather. He began to notice the way she lit up when he praised her, the way her eyes would sparkle when they spoke. What started as a friendship, a mentor-mentee relationship, began to cross a line that Nathan had not anticipated. Heather's vulnerability was something Nathan recognized, but it was also something that stirred feelings he had long suppressed. While Nathan was committed to his wife, Hannah, the attention from Heather, her obvious admiration, was intoxicating. Heather's need for approval, combined with Nathan's own emotional struggles, led them both down a dangerous path. What began as a professional relationship soon became more complicated as Heather began to develop a deep emotional attachment to Nathan. By early 2014, Heather's obsession had begun to take root. She had come to believe that Nathan was the only person who truly understood her, the only one who saw her for who she was. She poured her heart out to him, hoping that he would fill the void of affection she so desperately craved. Nathan, however, was torn. He cared for Heather in a paternalistic way but also found himself drawn to her. He had long struggled with his own marital dissatisfaction, and the attention from Heather, however innocent, provided a brief escape from the tensions at home. But it was clear that Heather's feelings were growing deeper, and more dangerous. Her obsession took shape in small, insidious ways. She began showing up at Nathan's basketball games, sitting in the stands, waiting for him after practice. She would text him frequently, sometimes sending long messages late into the night. It became clear that her feelings for Nathan were no longer those of a grateful student, but of something far more intense, something that, in hindsight, should have been a warning to Nathan. She was no longer just seeking guidance. She wanted something more, a deep, emotional connection that Nathan was not prepared to offer. Despite these growing signs of Heather's attachment, Nathan tried to keep things professional. He attempted to distance himself from her, reminding her that their relationship needed to remain strictly within the boundaries of mentor and student. But Heather, hurt and confused, saw Nathan's attempts at distance as a rejection. She couldn't understand why Nathan wouldn't acknowledge their connection as something more meaningful. Her insecurity, fueled by the loneliness and neglect she had experienced in her own life, became a driving force behind her obsession. Heather could not fathom the idea of losing Nathan's attention. It was all she had. As Nathan distanced himself, Heather's obsession deepened. She began to fantasize about a future with him, imagining that one day, he would leave his wife, Hannah, and be with her. This idea consumed her, and with each passing day, her jealousy and possessiveness grew. It was at this point that Heather took a dark turn. Desperate to maintain her grip on Nathan and fully believing that she could win his affection, she began to act out in increasingly extreme ways. The innocent affection she had once felt for Nathan transformed into something far more dangerous, an unhealthy, all-consuming obsession. And as her feelings for Nathan grew stronger, so did her bitterness toward Hannah. She began to resent Hannah for keeping Nathan from her, for being the obstacle that stood between her and the life she believed she was destined to have with him. Nathan, caught between the pressures of his marriage and his increasingly complicated relationship with Heather, was now at the center of a storm he had never anticipated. What started as a simple mentorship had escalated into something far more toxic. And for Heather, this was just the beginning of her descent into madness, an obsession that would soon spiral out of control with devastating consequences. As the months wore on, the tension between Nathan Ellis and Heather Malone only intensified. What had started as a seemingly innocent bond between a coach and his student had grown into a secret that threatened to destroy everything in Nathan's life. While Heather's obsession deepened, Nathan struggled to maintain control of the situation. Unbeknownst to him, the consequences of his actions were beginning to unfold in ways he had never imagined. At home, Nathan's marriage to Hannah appeared to be in jeopardy, though from the outside, it looked like everything was still intact. On the surface, Nathan and Hannah were the perfect couple, friendly, supportive, and deeply in love. They were often seen at community events, attending their church together, and hosting gatherings at their home. The couple had been married for over 5 years and, by all accounts, seemed to have a stable and happy life. Hannah, a kindergarten teacher, was known for her warmth and gentle nature, and she adored her husband. She had always been supportive of Nathan's career, allowing him the time he needed to focus on his work as a coach, without question or complaint. But behind closed doors, Nathan's behavior began to change. He was distant, more irritable, and increasingly distracted. His late nights at the basketball gym became more frequent, and his attention during family time began to wane. Hannah, perceptive as she was, couldn't help but notice the small, almost imperceptible shifts in his behavior. She questioned him on a few occasions, but Nathan brushed off her concerns, telling her that he was just stressed from work. After all, coaching high school basketball and managing his personal life was no easy feat. Still, there was something about Nathan's response that didn't sit well with Hannah. She noticed that he was spending more time on his phone, texting late into the night. When she asked him about it, he would become defensive or change the subject. His once affectionate and loving nature now seemed strained, as if there was a wall between them that he was unwilling to let her pass. Hannah's intuition told her that something was amiss, but she had no concrete evidence to go on. It wasn't until one afternoon when she noticed an unfamiliar number on Nathan's phone, one that had appeared in his texts repeatedly, that she decided to investigate further. What she found shattered her world. The number belonged to Heather Malone. Initially, Hannah thought it might be a miscommunication, a casual text between a coach and a student, but as she dug deeper, she uncovered a series of messages that made her blood run cold. Nathan and Heather had been texting each other for months. The messages ranged from casual exchanges about schoolwork to more personal, intimate conversations that crossed the line between professional and inappropriate. There were messages that seemed to express concern for Heather's well-being, as well as others that seemed more flirtatious, even suggestive. The deeper Hannah dug, the clearer it became that Nathan's relationship with Heather had transformed into something far more than a mere mentor-student dynamic. Heartbroken and confused, Hannah confronted Nathan that evening. As she showed him the messages, the color drained from his face. He stammered, attempting to explain the situation, but there was no easy way out. Heather had become more than just a student, she had wormed her way into Nathan's heart, and their connection had become undeniable. Nathan's guilt was palpable, and although he tried to convince Hannah that he had never meant for things to escalate the way they had, the damage was done. The trust between them had been shattered. Hannah, devastated by the betrayal, took a step back. She asked Nathan if he loved Heather, and after a long silence, he finally admitted that there had been an emotional affair, one that he was ashamed of but couldn't fully explain. He expressed remorse, but it was clear that his feelings for Heather ran deeper than he had originally let on. The confession only added fuel to the fire. It wasn't just the physical nature of the affair that upset Hannah, it was the emotional betrayal. The man she had trusted and loved had been giving his heart to another woman, and all the while, she had been oblivious to it. Despite Nathan's promises to end the relationship with Heather and rebuild their marriage, the damage was too great. Hannah was left to grapple with feelings of hurt, anger, and humiliation. She no longer saw Nathan the way she once had. The foundation of their marriage had been cracked, and no matter how much Nathan tried to reassure her, the cracks were too deep to repair easily. Their conversations turned into arguments, and their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, grew cold and silent. Meanwhile, Heather, unaware of the turmoil she had caused in Nathan's marriage, had her own demons to face. The realization that Nathan had confessed his infidelity to his wife did little to deter Heather's obsession with him. In fact, it only fueled the fire. Heather believed that Nathan's confession was a sign that he was ready to leave his wife and be with her. She clung to this idea, deluding herself into thinking that their connection was meant to be. Every message, every moment of attention from Nathan only solidified her belief that they were destined to be together. But as Heather's obsession with Nathan deepened, her emotional instability began to show. She started to escalate her actions, pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable. She began to show up at Nathan's house unannounced, waiting outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. She would text him incessantly, sending him messages about her love for him and pleading for him to leave Hannah. In her mind, Nathan belonged with her, and she couldn't understand why he was hesitating. As Heather's behavior became more erratic, Nathan found himself caught between two worlds. He loved his wife, Hannah, but he could not deny the pull he felt toward Heather. It was a dangerous game he was playing, one that had already torn his marriage apart and now threatened to destroy him as well. His inability to cut ties with Heather only worsened the situation. Heather's obsession had consumed her, and her jealousy of Hannah had reached a boiling point. In her mind, Heather was the one who truly understood Nathan. She was the one who had been there for him when he needed someone to confide in. Hannah, with her calm and nurturing demeanor, had no place in Nathan's life anymore. Heather saw herself as the solution to Nathan's unhappiness, and she was willing to do whatever it took to have him to herself. But what Heather didn't realize was that her obsession was beginning to have dangerous consequences, not only for her but for everyone around her. The more she tried to control Nathan and his marriage, the more her world spiraled out of control. The line between love and obsession had blurred, and the consequences of her actions would soon reach a tragic and irreversible point. The spiral into madness continued its unrelenting course, and Heather Malone's obsession with Nathan Ellis had reached a tipping point. What had started as an innocent crush, then a dangerous emotional entanglement, had now become a dark and vengeful obsession that was threatening not only Nathan's life but the lives of everyone around him. Heather's desire for control and her resentment toward Hannah had become all-consuming, and she would stop at nothing to keep Nathan for herself. As the tension grew between the two women, Heather's mental state deteriorated, and she began to hatch a plan that would have deadly consequences. By the summer of 2013, Heather's feelings of betrayal had festered into full-blown rage. She could no longer accept that Nathan, the man she believed was meant to be with her, was still tied to his wife. Heather had convinced herself that if only Hannah were out of the picture, Nathan would finally be free to be with her. But how could she sever the connection between Nathan and Hannah once and for all? The answer, in Heather's mind, was simple: she would destroy the one thing that held Nathan to his wife, their unborn child. It was a dark and twisted plan, fueled by jealousy and a deep sense of entitlement. Heather knew that Nathan and Hannah had been trying to start a family, and when Hannah announced she was pregnant in the spring of 2013, it struck a nerve with Heather. To Heather, this pregnancy symbolized everything she could never have: Nathan's love, his devotion, his future. She saw the unborn child as a barrier between her and the life she desperately wanted. If she could eliminate that barrier, Nathan would have no reason to stay with Hannah. Heather's first attempt to sabotage the pregnancy came in the form of poisoning. She had learned that Hannah drank herbal teas regularly, a practice she believed helped her relax after long days of teaching. Heather saw this as an opportunity. Armed with her knowledge of the specific teas Hannah favored, she began to research substances that could be subtly added to a drink, something that would cause harm without immediate detection. After days of searching online and consulting obscure sources, Heather found what she was looking for: a potent but undetectable toxin that could induce a miscarriage. It was the perfect solution in her twisted mind. For several weeks, Heather carefully monitored Hannah's routines. She had learned which teas Hannah drank most often and began to purchase the same brand for herself, mixing in small doses of the poison. She waited patiently for the right moment to strike, certain that her plan would succeed. When she finally put her plan into motion, she took a risk by introducing the toxic tea to Hannah's daily routine. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Heather watched from a distance as Hannah drank the tea without hesitation, unaware of the deadly substance that was coursing through her system. In the following days, Hannah began to experience strange symptoms: nausea, dizziness, and fatigue. She attributed these symptoms to stress and the physical toll of pregnancy. However, as the days wore on, Hannah's condition worsened. She became weaker, and her doctor advised her to take it easy and drink more fluids. It wasn't until she started to spot blood that she realized something was terribly wrong. Frantic, she rushed to the emergency room, where the doctors confirmed her worst fear: a miscarriage. The doctors told her that while it was common for pregnancies to end in miscarriage, the severity of her symptoms raised suspicions about foul play. The doctors couldn't pinpoint the cause of the miscarriage at that point, but they assured her that she needed to rest and recover physically and emotionally. Hannah was devastated. The miscarriage was a blow that shattered her, both physically and emotionally. Nathan, equally distraught, tried to comfort his wife, but there was a coldness between them now, an unspoken tension that neither of them could escape. Nathan couldn't understand why this had happened. Though he had reassured Hannah that they would try again, he could sense that the emotional damage had already taken root. Heather's role in the miscarriage would remain a secret, for now. But the failed poisoning attempt only made Heather more desperate. The fact that her plot had been uncovered without ever fully achieving its intended result filled her with rage. The miscarriage, while painful, had not brought Nathan and Hannah to the breaking point that Heather had anticipated. If anything, it had only brought them closer, reinforcing the love they shared. Nathan was steadfast in his support for his wife, and Heather, in her twisted mind, could not accept that. This failure only hardened her resolve. If poisoning didn't work, she would need to take more drastic measures to make sure Hannah was out of the picture for good. And so, Heather's obsession morphed into something even darker. With the thought of the failed miscarriage still burning in her mind, Heather decided that if she couldn't hurt Hannah through subtle means, she would confront her directly. The plan she hatched was chilling in its simplicity. She would confront Hannah face to face, and she would take matters into her own hands. By January 2014, the tension between Nathan, Hannah, and Heather had reached a boiling point. Heather was no longer content with staying in the shadows. Her infatuation with Nathan had become a delusion, and in her mind, the only way to free Nathan from his marriage was through violence. She had become convinced that only by eliminating Hannah completely could she have the life she believed was meant for her and Nathan. It was on a cold winter evening in January 2014 that Heather decided to confront Hannah in person. She showed up at the Ellis household unannounced, her mind set on ending things once and for all. Nathan was away at the gym, leaving Hannah alone in the house. Heather knew this was the moment. She barged into the house, her presence like a storm that couldn't be stopped. At first, Hannah was startled, unsure of what Heather's visit meant. Heather stood at the door, her face twisted with emotion, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and determination. "I won't let you ruin everything," Heather spat, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "He's mine, you hear me? He always was. You don't deserve him." Hannah, shocked and confused, tried to reason with Heather, pleading with her to leave and give her space. But Heather wasn't interested in reasoning. In her mind, she had already lost everything, her hope, her future, and if she couldn't have Nathan, no one could. In a violent outburst, Heather lunged at Hannah, shoving her against the wall. The confrontation quickly escalated, and a struggle ensued. In the chaos of the confrontation, Heather managed to pull out a small handgun she had brought with her. The two women grappled for control of the weapon, each fighting for her life. In the scuffle, a gunshot rang out, and chaos erupted. The bullet missed Hannah but struck the officer who had arrived on the scene to try to break up the altercation. The officer was fatally wounded, and in the chaos that followed, Heather was fatally shot in the exchange of fire. The brutal end to Heather's obsession sent shockwaves through the community. The violence had escalated beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Heather's tragic and senseless death was the final chapter in a story of obsession, betrayal, and irreversible consequences. The toll of Heather's actions was not just on her own life, but on Nathan, Hannah, the officer, and their families. The community, once so peaceful, would never be the same again. The aftermath of Heather Malone's tragic death sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge, a community that had long prided itself on its quiet, close-knit atmosphere. The violent end to her obsession with Nathan Ellis left everyone reeling, and the consequences of her actions would ripple out, touching the lives of everyone involved. As the dust settled and the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this was not just a story of a love triangle gone wrong, but a tale of emotional turmoil, shattered lives, and irreversible choices. Nathan Ellis, once a respected high school basketball coach and pillar of the community, found himself at the center of a media storm. The revelation of his affair with Heather Malone, the affair that had been kept hidden for months, brought him under intense public scrutiny. What had been a private, shameful chapter of his life was now exposed for all to see. The affair, combined with the tragic events that followed, painted Nathan in a harsh light. At first, Nathan was viewed as a victim, caught in a toxic, manipulative relationship with a student. Many sympathized with him, understanding the complex emotions involved in his position as a married man and mentor to a troubled young woman. But as the investigation progressed and more details emerged, public perception began to shift. Nathan's affair with Heather was not just a simple lapse in judgment, it had been a full-blown emotional entanglement that had contributed to the chain of events leading to Heather's death. Nathan's inability to sever ties with Heather when things had escalated was seen as a critical failure, one that ultimately had devastating consequences. The pressure on Nathan was immense. In the weeks following Heather's death, he withdrew from public life. His once thriving career as a coach came to a halt. The school district launched an internal investigation into his conduct, and while Nathan was not charged with any criminal wrongdoing, he was placed on administrative leave. The affair, now out in the open, tainted his professional reputation beyond repair. But the personal cost to Nathan was far greater than the professional fallout. His marriage, already on fragile ground, had reached its breaking point. While Nathan had made efforts to salvage his relationship with Hannah, the betrayal was too much to overcome. Hannah, deeply scarred by the emotional toll of Nathan's affair and the murder of a woman who had once been a part of their lives, could not bring herself to forgive him. The emotional wreckage left in the wake of Heather's death was too great for her to bear. Nathan and Hannah filed for divorce shortly after the tragedy. The public nature of their separation, combined with the press coverage of the affair, left both of them emotionally shattered. Nathan was forced to grapple with the reality of the destruction he had caused. His actions, while not directly responsible for Heather's death, had played a significant role in the chain of events that led to it. The guilt was palpable. In private moments, Nathan would reflect on how he had allowed things to spiral out of control, how he had let his emotions cloud his judgment, and how, in his attempts to be there for Heather, he had failed the people who mattered most, his wife and himself. Nathan's life, once filled with promise and potential, was now in ruins. Hannah Ellis, as the victim of Heather's obsession, bore a different kind of burden. She had suffered through the emotional devastation of her husband's infidelity and now, with the violent end to the affair, was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. The miscarriage had been a devastating blow, but the events that followed, particularly Heather's violent intrusion into her home, tore at the fabric of her sense of security and safety. While Hannah had been physically unharmed in the confrontation, the emotional trauma of having to face Heather, someone she had once trusted, even though she had been unaware of the affair, was immeasurable. Heather's rage and jealousy had been expressed violently in her presence, and the fact that Heather had come to her home with the intention of taking her life left Hannah deeply shaken. In the aftermath of the shooting, Hannah suffered from bouts of anxiety and panic attacks, unable to shake the images of the confrontation and the haunting knowledge that Heather had been willing to go so far to destroy her. The emotional toll of the affair, the miscarriage, and the murder left Hannah questioning her own worth. She felt betrayed not only by Nathan, but by the system that had allowed Heather's obsessive behavior to go unchecked. Though she tried to find solace in the support of family and friends, the psychological scars were profound. The divorce proceedings that followed were painful, but Hannah knew it was the only way forward. She had to protect herself, both physically and emotionally, from the trauma of her past life with Nathan. The community rallied around her, offering support, but no amount of sympathy could undo the damage that had been done. It was clear to those close to Hannah that, despite her outward appearance of strength, she was struggling to cope with the emotional fallout. The once vibrant woman, known for her nurturing and caring nature, became withdrawn and quiet. She sought therapy to help her process the trauma, but even in the safety of her own home, the memories of that fateful night haunted her. The tragic death of Officer Mark Davis, who had responded to the scene and lost his life during the confrontation, added another layer of grief to an already devastating story. Officer Davis had been a well-respected member of the Oak Ridge Police Department, known for his dedication to his job and his community. His death was a stark reminder of the danger that had been present that night and the cost of Heather's obsession. Officer Davis had been one of the first on the scene when Heather arrived at the Ellis household, gun in hand. In the chaos of the confrontation, as Heather tried to escape after fatally wounding Hannah, Officer Davis was shot and killed. His death, while a tragic result of the events, also underscored the broader consequences of Heather's uncontrolled emotions. He had been a father, a husband, and a friend, and his loss devastated the community. A memorial service was held in his honor, with hundreds of local residents attending to pay their respects. His legacy was one of bravery, but his untimely death reminded everyone of the far-reaching effects of the violence that had occurred that night. The entire Oak Ridge community, once peaceful and serene, was left grappling with the aftershocks of the violence that had unfolded. It wasn't just the individuals directly involved who felt the effects. The local high school, where Nathan Ellis had once been a beloved figure, struggled with its own fallout. Students, teachers, and parents were left to process the implications of the affair and the murder. The school district launched an investigation into Nathan's conduct, and the football and basketball programs, which had once been symbols of pride for the community, were placed under intense scrutiny. There were no winners in this tragedy. Even those who had once supported Nathan's career now found themselves questioning their trust in him. As the story unfolded in the media, the town found itself divided. Some people saw Nathan as a victim of Heather's obsession, while others viewed him as complicit in the affair that had sparked the violence. The community, once united, was now fractured, as different factions grappled with their own version of the truth. In the aftermath of Heather's death, a quiet, uncomfortable silence hung over Oak Ridge. The trauma of the affair, the miscarriage, the murder, and the fallout from the divorce lingered in the air, poisoning the relationships of those who had once been close. There were no easy answers, no clear resolution. The families, the community, and even the town itself would never be the same. Ultimately, the legacy of this tragic tale was one of unchecked obsession and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Heather Malone's obsessive love for Nathan Ellis, her inability to accept rejection, and her belief that she was entitled to his affection, had driven her to commit violent acts that destroyed lives. The story served as a chilling reminder of the destructive power of obsession, the fragility of human emotions, and the dire consequences of crossing boundaries that should never be crossed. For Nathan and Hannah Ellis, the road ahead was uncertain. The emotional scars they carried would never fade, and while they might eventually rebuild their lives separately, they would always be haunted by the past. For the community of Oak Ridge, the tragedy served as a reminder of how easily trust can be broken, how quickly lives can spiral out of control, and how the legacy of obsession can echo through generations. It was a painful, tragic tale, one that would leave its mark on everyone involved for years to come.